The Joker was obviously a huge blockbuster, and for those who haven't seen the movies that inspired it, it was Taxi Driver and this movie that we watch, The King of Comedy. For those who haven't watched those movies or haven't watched both, obviously Taxi Driver is the more popular of the two. You may think the Joker is a completely original concept. While The Joker is a great movie, once you've seen either or both of these movies, you'll see how heavily it's borrowed from them. It just updated with kind of modern themes and a modern look on the lead character, that loser character that is a central part of the movie. Here in modern days, that character's looked as more of like a incel, which is kind of a new term, involuntary celibate, for those not familiar with that terminology. And men and manhood has been a theme of, I would say, the last 10 years, or at least I know you're in Canada, at least American men. The idea of what is a man, what is masculinity, all these terms that have come up with this recent generation. If you're a straight male or a straight female, you're a cis. There's a term for you. All the pronouns that people go by, why can't we just simplify these things? I think that's led to the rise of Donald Trump and Andrew Tate. Well, there's a whole subculture of these guys and just talk of men and masculinity and what's a man's role. The Joker really got into these type of things, and Taxi Driver, I think, got into these type of things obviously several generations before. I think that's kind of divergence with the King of the Comedy and the Joker, is I don't think this gets into what it takes to be a man in manhood, but certainly if you look at it through today's lens, it kind of does as well. Obviously, on the surface, this is about fame, seeking fame, how far would you go for fame? But if you expand on the themes, you do have a guy that lives at home. He is involuntarily celibate, so he is what we would consider an incel, a guy older, living in his mother's basement, living a fantasy in his head, doesn't live up to what a woman expects a man to be. So there are some of those themes there that I think coincide with what's going on in the world today. That's in the forefront of the Joker. In the forefront of this is fame and how far would you go for fame? And you certainly have that going on today where you look at TikTok, where people go to all of these extremes just to get attention, to get views. It's like, how far would you go for that stuff? I think watching this for me, what made it personal, at least when I originally saw it, was I kind of saw a little bit of myself in Rupert Pupkin in that I also want a certain level of fame. That's why we're doing these videos. I mean, why else are we doing these videos? We would just watch these movies and just keep that enjoyment to ourselves. We want to not just share it, but we want to get views and we want to get popular here on YouTube. And we're also both in the entertainment field, obviously on the lower end of it, but we're in there. When I first got into this, I remember I got some tickets to a convention that was going on in Madison Square Garden. There was this area inside of it. They had this convention I got tickets for. I forgot what type of film convention it was. But it was some type of film convention. I remember seeing all these booths of people who had their films, and all these booths were so empty that you almost didn't want to make eye contact because it's like, oh, then I gotta like buy something, and it's just like, and so to a certain level, you felt sorry for these people because they're pouring their heart onto these films, and there was just no one there interested in even just buying a DVD or even stopping at their booth. And I stopped at this one guy's booth, and he was talking about this movie he made about his father, and talking about his father and his lack of relationship with his father, and the father. Why I don't have a relationship with my father? I was just like, dude, enough with your father. And he's just spent, I think he was saying he spent his life saving on this movie, and it's just like, you felt kind of sad and pathetic for him, but in a way, he did go all in. And for me, a filmmaker, I've never gone all in. I've never been a Rupert Pupkin where it's like, all right, it's a make or break. This is it. Either I make it or I'm living in the basement of my mother's house. I've never gone to that level, but you can't make it if you don't risk it all, if you're not willing to bet on yourself. And There's the romantic side of betting on yourself where you make it. And there's the other side of betting on yourself where you're delusional. Dude, you're never gonna fucking make it. There's a flip side to that coin. The story that everyone dreams about, rags to riches, and like I just had the money in my pocket and I went to New York and I to be a star and I made it. Sometimes you spend the last dollar in your pocket, you go to New York and then you're begging for change on the sidewalk. Yeah, there are a lot of interesting themes in this movie and that we can definitely explore more, but those are kind of the themes that stuck out to me in this rewatch.
Yeah, for sure. And I found myself wondering, every time I watch this movie, and this time was no exception, I find myself thinking, why do I like this? Why do I enjoy this movie so much? Why do I like Rupert Pupkin? Because I do. I like him. I like watching him. And I think it's partly because, on some level, we can all identify with Rupert Pupkin. He's sort of a loser. He's sort of a nobody, but he has the dream. We all have the dream where we want to be successful. Maybe we want to be famous. Maybe we want to get the beautiful girl. You know, so we can identify with that. And I think in some ways he goes further than a lot of people do, even in just his day to day stuff that he does. He's not afraid to get himself into some embarrassing situations, which most of us would say, okay, I would never do that. Or you watch and you think, why are you doing that? Don't do that. But there is something, it's like living vicariously through him. The same way you can live vicariously through one of the gangsters in a 30s gangster film and think, wow, wouldn't that be great if I could just go in there and take what I want and become rich and become powerful. You can kind of think the way, like, what if I did what Rupert Pupkin did? What if I was a little more aggressive or whatever it is? So I think we do kind of identify with that, and we do understand Rupert Pupkin. And as you said, I think there's a little bit of Rupert Pupkin in me, and I think there's a little bit of Rupert Pupkin in all of us. Anyone who's ever had a dream, and especially people who haven't really achieved the dream, because you're right. Some people just kind of luck into it right off the bat, and they become very successful. Other people will spend years and years, and they'll just be hammering away, trying, and never really getting anywhere. And maybe that's where Rupert Pupkin kind of begins in this movie. He's at that point where he's going to do something, maybe something crazy. But I just find him immensely watchable, and even though I'm embarrassed at times, I always want to see what's he going to do next.
Mhm.
I enjoy him as a character.
There's a million guys that are kind of like heroes to incels and or people who just termed incels. There are guys who are not virgins that people just throw that term at. It's just like a catch-all term for
Yeah.
straight men who just feel like outsiders in this world.
Hmm.
And Rupert Pumpkin is certainly an outsider. There are certainly the parallels there. Let's just break his character down from a few different aspects. Let's talk about that male outsider character that De Niro made popular. And again, De Niro did have a small role in the Joker film as well, but I think there are a lot of similarities with this and Taxi Driver. So this was a script that was going around for a while in the 70s, and De Niro really wanted Scorsese to make it, but Scorsese, I think, in interviews was saying he didn't really like connect with the script because even though he was a big time director, he wasn't in front of the camera, so he didn't have that fame. He didn't view it through that lens. A guy like De Niro, who is in front of the screen all the time and is probably does have some stories that are similar to the Jerry Lewis character would have in real life. He more connected with it. It took years before Scorsese finally decided to do it. But yeah, as far as like this character goes, definitely a rich character, complex character. Great that it was played by actor who could bring some of those nuances to the screen. Again, this is viewed as a comedy. The fact that it's viewed as a comedy makes it even more tragic to me because we're supposed to be laughing at this guy, and then when you find you have parallels with yourself and this guy, it's like, am I the pathetic one? Because I see parallels in this guy. We're meant to laugh at some of his poor decision making. It's like, man, I've made poor decisions. I haven't kidnapped anybody, but hey, like I'm following my dreams. I have fantasies. I daydream. Am I the butt of the joke as well? You know, is my life not worthy of being lived? That's halfway over at this point. As much as it's a comedy, it's depressing as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting comedy in the sense that it's not a very overt comedy. You know, there's not a lot of gags in it. There's not a lot of slapstick humor. There's
That
no
just tells you how
obvious,
bad of
you
a
know,
comedian Rupert Pupkin is.
perhaps. But, I think even Scorsese and Robert De Niro, when somebody called it a comedy, they were kind of like, well, is it a comedy? I don't know, and maybe they're joking in a way, but I think it's a comedy that is very straight faced. They take themselves very seriously, and it feels very real. The characters feel real. They're not just there trying to do anything for a laugh. You know what I mean? They feel like real people. I believe Rupert Pupkin. I believe he's a real guy in this story. You know, and yeah, there is a lot of pain and tragedy in there, and I think it's a very prescient film in the sense that it kind of predicts where the world was going at the time. I mean, we were at the very beginning of the 80s, and I think it just got worse in terms of this whole celebrity worship and people getting famous for crazy reasons. Like whether it's a sex tape or remember when Hugh Grant had sex with a prostitute, and then the prostitute became very famous and made a lot of money. Like it's
Well, with Hugh Grant, for those who don't remember, he was up and coming British actor. His girlfriend was Elizabeth Hurley, who was very beautiful, is very beautiful.
yeah,
And they were both rising stars at the same time, and they were a couple. And Denise Brown, I think was her name, or something Brown.
Divine
The
Brown,
Divine
Divine
Brown
Brown, yeah,
was a call girl of the night,
yes,
woman of leisure, who he solicited oral favors from. And as Bill Clinton would say,
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
depending on how you would convey that, but yeah, that got her a certain level of fame. I think she went on to do like an adult film or something and made the talk
yeah.
show circuit. So
Oh yeah, yeah. I
that
think
was
she
her.
made. She was a millionaire by the time that was all done. She got
Yeah,
contracts to model clothes, and I think she may have had a book deal. I mean, it was, it made her famous. It made her rich. So,
yeah, yeah.
um, and it's interesting that Hugh Grant, after that, he went on the talk show circuit and apologized to everyone. He apologized to his fans. He apologized to the girlfriend. He apologized. In a way, it could almost be an extension of this movie because he went into that talk show world and kind of made it okay just by being so, what's the word? He was just so kind of apologetic, and you couldn't help but feel bad for him in a way. But yeah, I mean, it feels like the King of Comedy is really the very beginning of this kind of culture and people getting famous for strange reasons like that. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think it was ahead of its time, and I think the public didn't really appreciate it. They maybe didn't want to see what it had to say in a way.
Hmm. Well, obviously, what Hugh Grant did, he didn't do on purpose. He wasn't saying, "Hey, how do I jumpstart my acting career? Let me go out and get this blowjob." Whereas Rupert Pumpkin, he was someone who didn't want to take the long route. He didn't want to earn his stripes. He just felt entitled. I don't want to go through the process of possibly being rejected. I know under the right circumstance, I won't be rejected. And he always tried to create the perfect circumstance. And he did that.
Yeah,
Obviously, the debate is how much of this story at the end was in his head. As we did see throughout the film, a lot of the highs were all in his head, and a lot of the lows were reality. So we're left at the end to question, like, how much of the ending, which was a high, was in his head. Most of the film, it was black and white. You knew which parts were fantasy and you knew which parts were reality. And I do like the fact that at the end, Scorsese showed restraint and left it up to the viewer to decide. I think he did a similar type ending with Taxi Driver, the
Yeah.
unreliable narrator. Yeah, just depending, I guess, on your perspective or where you're at in your life is how you're going to view his ultimate end, Rupert Pupkin, and what happened to him. But definitely someone who believed in himself, maybe to a fault or definitely to a fault. And he created this circumstance where he knew, okay, at the end of this, there's gonna be a lot of bad. However it played out. He knew, like, okay, he's going to jail. But
Yeah.
if people could just see how talented he was, then it would all be worth it. If he could just have that touch of fame. And people do that today. They do these crazy things to get noticed. Like you said, a sex tape, Kim Kardashian. The sex tape is out there. Yeah, there's a lot of negative that goes with it and went with it for her, but it got her noticed. And if people could just notice her, then they would see how talented she was. And lo and behold, yeah, she dropped that sex tape and there was a lot of negative that came with it, but she's that family has multiple billionaires in it right now, thanks to that
Yeah.
sex tape.
Yeah.
However you want to view it, her extreme act paid off. There are plenty of stories like that of people who seemingly don't have the talent that warrants their fame, but they bet on themselves. There was an incident that got their name popular, not necessarily an incident of pure talent that got their name into the lexicon of popular culture, but it got their name out there and they took full advantage and became extremely successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be worth noting, too, that at the time, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was this huge, huge cultural thing. And this is long before the internet existed or anything like that. And comedians will tell you that at that time, if you appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, you would be booked solid for the next 6 months. You would have 6 months of work, comedy clubs all over, just from one appearance. And so, even looking at it in that simple way, Rupert Pupkin's plan makes sense, right? If he could just appear on there, he would have all kinds of work, you know? And he takes it to a big extreme, of course, and gets even more out of it, maybe, depending on how much you believe the ending. Um, but it's hard to imagine today how important the Tonight Show really was, and I think that's kind of what this show, the Jerry Langford Show, is kind of based on that. And I hear that they even asked Johnny Carson at one point if he would consider being in the King of Comedy and playing that part, but he said no, and probably for the best. But I think that Jerry Lewis is brilliant in that part, and you've got people in the movie who, like Fred DeCordova, who was the producer of the Tonight Show, and he plays Jerry Langford's producer, and even the announcer, what's his name, the announcer on the show, he was a real announcer in real life, and he was at one time on the Tonight Show. So it kind of feels like this is kind of their version of the Tonight Show, to sort of put it in the cultural context, the Jerry Langford Show.
Obviously today, Jimmy Kimmel isn't viewed as the biggest star in Hollywood or one of the biggest stars or one of the biggest star makers in Hollywood. And, someone like him, Stephen Colbert, they are the equivalent of what the Jerry Lewis character is in today's time, but that aspect of star making isn't really there with the late night talk show. Now it's more like reality shows like America's Got Talent or The Voice or shows like that. I think will more be in line with a Rupert Pumpkin in today's day and age. I'm only in my mother's basement because I don't have the audience, but I have all the talent in the world. Anyone can jump on social media, as we're doing now, and just, do what it is that they do that feels warranting the attention of others. If you have what it takes, either you're that bad or that good, you're going to get noticed. And then from there, when you get noticed, either for a good or bad thing, it's up to you to then try to find a way to monetize it.
Yeah, well, I think it used to be in Rupert Pupkin's day, It used to be more about gatekeepers, and it was a problem with gatekeepers. You needed to get on the TV show in order for people to see you, or you needed to get your record played on the radio in order for anyone to hear it. And so it was about the gatekeepers who say, no, I don't really believe in you. I don't want to put you on my show. I'm not going to play your record. And that could be a real problem for some people. There could be really talented people who just weren't being allowed the exposure. But nowadays, it's almost the opposite problem, where there's no gatekeepers now. You can just get stuff up there on YouTube or anywhere else. And now it's just that there's too many people, right? There's millions of people all doing this, and they're all saying, look at me, look at me. So how do you stand out?
Which makes it
pack?
harder to get noticed and makes people go to even further extremes to get noticed.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know which system is better, but I kind of miss the old days in some ways, because at least you kind of knew where you stood. But
we wouldn't be on this podcast / YouTube show, and
that's true,
trying to get noticed either. We'd be in our mother's basements plotting and scheming ways to get noticed. So
yes, well,
it's all a double-edged sword. I never tend to be like, oh, in the good old days, or if things never changed. I'm always of the mindset that, hey, things change for a reason. Things ultimately, they do get better. You can look at the negative in any situation, but I always try to look at the positive.
Interesting. You've mentioned already that there's a lot of parallels between this movie and Taxi Driver, and I think there really are. I mean, one of the first things I noticed about it when I saw it years ago was the similarities. The character who's the outsider, and he has an interesting name, Travis Bickle, Rupert Pupkin. They kind of have similarly odd names, and they're both, obsessed with a beautiful woman who's kind of out of their league, right? And they both wind up kind of embarrassing or humiliating that woman in some way.
The syndrome of putting women on pedestals. Maybe she's not out of your league, but in your mind, you think so little of yourself that no woman can find you desirable because you hate yourself.
Yeah.
I don't think, especially in this particular film, that the woman is out of his league. I mean, she is independent. He's trying to say, hey, I'm going to take you away from this life. I'm going to make a better life for you. Well, she's an independent woman doing her own thing. She doesn't have the ideal life. She's divorced. She's not thrilled with her job, but she's very much independent. And this guy who wants to save her, be her knight in shining armor, he lives at home in his mother's basement. It's like, how are you bettering her life? They got together, she'd be bettering his life. So it's a certain aspect, like, it's kind of ridiculous that he's going to save her if they got together. But the other aspect of it as well is, like, she's beautiful. I mean, she's not necessarily anyone that needs to be put on a pedestal. She has a job. I think she was, with her character say she was making $150 a week or something, but a job where she's not making that much money. She was not successful in a relationship. She's not successful in life, at least from her perspective, as far as how she feels about where she's gotten in life. Like, there's now meaning in my life. Me being a loser, it all paid off in the end. I ended up getting the girl that I couldn't get when I was a loser, now that I'm successful. And now it's this fairy tale thing. Life now has meaning. It's not just random success. It's not just me getting a girl. It's me getting the girl that I couldn't get before. In one of his fantasies, his high school principal came on and said, oh, remember me? And I thought you were a loser. And I think in one of his flashbacks, he was talking about bullies. And I think in his monologue, a lot of what he's views as successful is going back to his past. All those people who thought I was a loser, hey, it's like, it's justifying a lot of what's happened. And again, it's not just random success. It's success tied into how he viewed himself as a loser prior to that.
So I think that is the key. Diane Abbott, who plays Rita Keene, the bartender who is kind of Rupert Pupkin's dream woman. The woman, she was unattainable to him in high school. You know, she was like this super popular. She was cheerleader. She was someone who would have never given him the time of day in high school. And so he still wants to go back and kind of fix that, or get revenge or something, you know. So and it's the same thing with having the high school principal show up in his fantasy and say, yeah, I was wrong about you. You're a great guy. And, you know, all the bullies. And I mean, this is one way in which I can say that I do identify with Rupert Pupkin, because I can remember being 12 or 13 years old and being, you know, bullied in school and not being popular. And I would think to myself, well, one day I'm going to be a famous writer like Stephen King, you know, and then they'll be sorry. You know, they'll wish they had treated me better. And I think that's what Rupert Pupkin was thinking, and that's, you know, where he's still at in his 30s, isn't he? In this movie, he's still thinking back to high school and going, I want to fix this. You know, I want to show everybody that they were wrong about me, and I want to get the girl who was the unattainable dream girl in high school. And you're right that now she's perhaps not so much, you know, she's just a bartender, kind of a dead end job, and she might not be so unattainable, you know. She may have been attained by a lot of men by now. We don't really know too much, but you know, she's no longer that, you know.
Is that your
powerful.
subtle way of calling her a slut? She may have been obtained by a lot of men by now.
Well, you know, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, especially if you ever see the outtakes from the movie, there are some scenes in there where we kind of get the sense that she's popular with the men. You know, she may go out with a lot of different men. But of course, that may be outside of the reality of the movie, since those are outtakes. But anyway, I think he's very much stuck in that, wanting to prove to all those people who wronged him and all those people who said that he would never be anything. He wants to sort of prove them wrong and become Rupert Pupkin, the superstar.
We all have a little Rupert in us where it's just like, I'll prove them all wrong. You know?
Absolutely. Oh yes, absolutely. So far it's not working out, but you know, maybe one day.
But yeah, here you have De Niro in his prime.
Yes.
A young De Niro, one of the great actors ever. You know, maybe not one of the biggest movie stars. He's not a Tom Cruise or Cary Grant, but as far as acting goes, I mean, he's kind of more in the category of like a Daniel Day-Lewis and another contemporary of his in Al Pacino, and this is one of his better performances.
Yeah, and a character that isn't necessarily the kind of character that you would expect him to play. You know, he's sort of making himself look very uncool in this movie, right? I mean, even Travis Bickle, I think, looks cooler than him in a way than Rupert Pupkin. So in a way, it's kind of a brave performance.
And a performance that he wanted. He was the one pitching this to Scorsese. He liked the script and wanted Scorsese to direct him in it.
Absolutely. And I think he was right. It was a great idea, and it's a great movie. And it didn't really connect with the audience at the time, but a lot of great movies don't, right? A lot of great art doesn't connect because it's a little bit ahead of its time.
Yeah, so as far as the other people behind the scenes, Jerry Lewis, I think he gave a great performance, but I think, as you were saying with Johnny Carson, I think another actor in his particular role, I think would have helped elevate this film. Because, I mean, I love Jerry Lewis because I watch a lot of his movies, like The Nutty Professor and things like that. They were on syndication, where I had no cable as a kid. The only thing you could watch is like older movies. And especially like if you're home on the weekend, plotting your revenge against the bullies, as you know, as they're out having fun.
Yes.
At your home, it's like once the cartoons are over and you hit the afternoon time, and you have cable, you were a slave to like what networks would play during the day on the weekends. A lot of times they would just cycle out a bunch of old movies. While I was a fan of his to a certain extent, I don't think even then like he was much of a huge draw. So I think maybe having someone, all the men want to go out and have a beer with him, and all the women want to be with him, almost to an extent where you had a movie that's not similar to this in any way, but almost like a Fight Club, where you had that one character that was not Travis, I'm about to say Travis Bickle. Whoever the name of the lead character was, but you had obviously both guys playing him, and Brad Pitt was the ideal version of that character. But if you had like more of a leading man, a Robert Redford, I guess, would be like, a character like that at the time. I think he was great in the role, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong. And I think as a movie, he was the perfect fit. But I'm saying, like, as why it wasn't as commercially successful, I think more of a standard leading man would have probably helped, especially when you do have your leading man like Robert De Niro not looking like a leading man in this film, as you were saying before,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's probably one of the reasons why it wasn't as commercially successful. But I think from an artistic standpoint, I think, the casting was good, and Jerry Lewis definitely was good in this film as far as that goes.
Yeah, and I think I could be wrong, but I think it was kind of the first time that we really saw him in a kind of serious role, right? Like he's often a pretty zany, slapsticky kind of a guy, right? In a
Mhm.
lot of the old movies, and here he was kind of maybe playing a version of himself in a way, because his name is uh, Jerry Langford, Jerry Lewis, Jerry Langford, and he seems more like a real person, and he's not necessarily always a likable guy, right? He's sort of there's a little bit of darkness there. So interesting to see Jerry Lewis in a part like that, and maybe for the first time. Um, but yeah, that's an interesting point about having somebody else who was maybe a bigger current box office draw. I don't know. It's hard to say. The subject matter may still have been something that people weren't particularly interested in at the time. Maybe
Mhm.
like Scorsese didn't get it when he first read it. Maybe the public didn't get it when it first came out, you know,
Mhm.
and then they
Yeah.
caught on.
A nice little movie that definitely has its cult following, that's definitely been more appreciated as time has gone on, and definitely worth watching and revisiting.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And one other person I might mention here is Sandra Bernhard, who I have never really considered myself a fan of Sandra Bernhard. And I honestly didn't know her from many other movies, but I used to see her on the talk shows, oddly enough. Again, it's almost an extension of this movie, but she was a very popular talk show guest. I think she was on David Letterman dozens of times. She was just this popular talk show guest, and that's how I knew her. And I didn't really care for her particularly, but I have to say, in this movie, she is so perfect for this part. Like she is just so perfect, and I think it's probably the best thing she's ever done. And I can't imagine anybody else playing this part. She's just, I don't know. She is this role. She's just perfect for it.
They even mention Scorsese and a lot of the actors and Sandra Bernhard. There was a lot of ad-libbing in this film. So typically what happens when you give an actor, a performer, a chance to ad-lib, the character has even more similarities to them than they normally would have, because even when you're improvising, there's only so much you can improvise as the character. A lot of yourself tends to bleed out more the further away you move away from being scripted. In a lot of ways, this character was her. And she even joked that, like, it's the reason she became popular, and it's also the reason why she didn't get any more popular, because she's like, this is me. Like, people view me as difficult and
Yeah,
annoying.
yeah,
And I think that was her persona, whether that was really her or
hmm
not. That was her persona on the talk shows, and that was her persona on
hmm
this. Just difficult and annoying,
yeah,
funny, quirky, but not someone you want to spend too much time with.
yeah.
Like
Exactly. Yeah.
just almost in the talk shows. All right, you have your little 5 minute segment, then go away, and it's kind of like,
Yeah, but she's brilliant in this. I have to say, she's just
yeah,
perfect.
yeah, yeah. But again, she's perfect because she's annoying,
Yeah. One other thing, looking at this movie now, it's so of its time, I suppose. It was ahead of its time, but seeing the crowds of people on the street, who would just gather outside of the theater, waiting to get a glimpse of a celebrity, waiting to get a glimpse of Jerry Langford and maybe get to touch him or talk to him. Uh, I don't know. Like, is that culture still alive today, or has it all moved online? Is everybody
Well, you
online
got
kind of?
paparazzis and like screaming fans, and Beyonce's fans call themselves the Beehive. Yeah, of course you
Yeah,
have that. I think, yeah, that hasn't gone
yeah.
anywhere. You know,
Okay.
I know we're kind of wrapping up, or I was trying to wrap things up, but
Yes.
since you did mention that, it does remind me of something we didn't touch on yet with this film. Again, there's so much to touch on with this
Yeah.
character and this movie, is that he's not a fan, really. He's
Hmm.
not a fan. He
No.
wants his life, but he's not a fan. That's why
Yeah.
even when the movie starts and you see him with the actual fans, those people want to show how much they worship him. They want to show, like, they want the autographs and they want those things, but he more so wants his life. He isn't viewed the way he wants to be viewed because
Yeah.
he's putting himself in a position where he's around sycophants, so he's going to be treated like a sycophant. But he's not there because, oh my God, he's such a big fan of his. He's like, man, if you give me a shot, I can show you them just as good as you, and I belong where you
Hmm.
belong. Those other people that were there, they don't want to be on the show. They just want his
No,
autograph. They want to be a part
that's
of him.
right.
They love his
Yeah.
monologues. He's like, no, I can do a monologue like you. I don't think you're better than me. I don't think like you
Yeah.
I idolize you. I want to be you. In his ultimate fantasy, he's not a guest on the show. He's taken over the show. He's hosting his own show.
Yeah, for sure. He wants the opportunity that Jerry Langford can give him, and he maybe wants to be a peer. He wants to be in that world. He wants to be part of that world. He doesn't see himself as a crazy fan who just hangs out trying to get autographs.
I don't hold this against him, but when you look at his age and his culture, you do have a lot of these New York Italians, and especially, he's an older guy. There is a history of Italians of his generation not liking blacks. I mean, that's not a big secret. That's the one thing I don't like about Scorsese movies is you don't see a lot of black people, even in roles that clearly a black person would be in real life. He was going to get a budget for Mean Streets through Roger Corman. But Roger Corman thought it needed a black cast, and Scorsese was like,
Mm.
no way. Even in I think it was Gangs of New York, where they had the Boston Massacre. Well, he had one black character, I think, in that scene. And a lot of times when you see black characters show up in his movies, they're just there to be called a nigger and get killed. That happened in Taxi Driver. That happened in I think it was Goodfellas that had the one scene with Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just not a big fan from that aspect of it. So that kind of bothers me about Scorsese. Again, I didn't want it to affect the review completely. Great movie. Glad I rewatched it. Definitely worth revisiting. Great performance. And a great time capsule. Certain time capsules that haven't aged well. But that's what a time capsule is. It's
Yeah.
just an encompassing of that time period, and things change. The Times Square, New York has changed. It's
Hmm.
Disneyland now. Before it was what you see on the screen. It's
Yeah.
a different time in a lot of ways, and I love being a New Yorker, spending most of my life in New York, even though I wasn't born here. I grew up here.
Hmm.
Seeing old New York is always interesting to me as well, and all the characters around it. So yeah, awesome movie.
Yeah.
Glad we watched it.
Me too. Yeah. I love it.